الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا ونبينا محمد للقدر العظيم وعلى آله وأصحابه وأتباعه إلى يوم الدين. اللهم فقهنا في الدين وعلمنا التأويل وألهمنا رشدنا يا رب العالمين. Alhamdulillah. In our lessons on Imam Quduri's Mukhtasar, in the section on mu'amalat, on financial transactions, we began Kitab al-Buyu' last lesson, and we looked there at a few foundational concepts. Amongst them, what is property? Right? Because transactions take place through property. Okay? And we gave some background on the reality that Islam recognizes the reality of property and its inviolability of individual property, unless there are circumstances requiring its limiting. But we didn't touch upon that. Like there's clear public interest, like you have to build a road, for example, etc. So there are situations where the public interest may outweigh the individual interest, and that's recognized in the Sharia. But we looked at what is mal. We looked at what the integral of a contract is, and as we saw, the opening definition of al-bay'u. He tells us ينعقد بالإيجاب والقبول. A sales transaction comes into effect through what? Through a valid offer and acceptance. So we took the definition of bay'a in the Arabic language, okay? And the legal definition and the definition given by the author of the Lubab is a good definition. That what is bay'a? What is bay'a? Any hands? Yeah. So مبادلة مال بمال بالتراضي is exchange of an item of value for another item of value on the basis of taradi, on the basis of mutual agreement. And the component of mutual agreement is very important, and we touched upon the Quranic verse related to that. يا أيها الذين آمنوا, O you believe, لا تأكلوا أموالكم بينكم بالباطل. Do not consume one another's wealth in wrongful ways. إلا أن تكون تجارة عن تراض منكم. Unless your transaction be through trade on the basis of mutual agreement. Okay? So that taradi is very important. So he says وينعقد بالإيجاب والقبول. الانعقاد هو الحصول شرعا. Okay? It comes into effect through offer and acceptance. And by offer here, what is meant is what is mentioned first in order to affirm the transaction. وما يذكر أولا من كلام أحد العاقدين لإنشاء التصرف جزما, to initiate the transaction firmly. And here, appreciation of Arabic is very important, right? Because a lot of people err in this, students of knowledge, that they just said, okay, I just want to learn the subject, but they don't pay attention to the Arabic language, so you don't know what they're talking about. Why? Say awjaba. What does it mean? The awjaba, to begin. What does the word mean? What is it coming from? Right? Because المعاني اللغوية مراعاة في الحقائق الشرعية. The lexical meanings are taken into consideration in the legal meaning. So you say the word أوجب, what does it mean? What's the root from وجب? أوجب الشيء. Right? So it's important to pay attention to to language. ينعقد بالإيجاب. بالإيجاب. أوجب يوجب إيجابا. Is to affirm. It's a firm affirmation from wujud. Okay? It's a firm offer. والقبول هو ما يذكر ثانيا لإنشاء التصرف جزما, in order to initiate the transaction. And we took this principle, right? We took this principle that from the commentary, right? That what counts in the transaction is the meaning, right? At the bottom of the Lubab's comments here, وَالْمَعْنَى هُوَ الْمُعْتَبَرْ فِي هَذِهِ الْعُقُودِ. The meaning is what is considered in these transactions, okay? وَلِهَذِهِ يَنْعَقِدُ بِالتَّعَاطِي. This is why it comes to effect with ta'ati, with non-verbal exchange. Ta'ati, ata is giving. Ta'ati is giving from both sides. So there's an exchange of the two items that are being exchanged without explicit offer and acceptance, neither spoken nor written. Right? That's why they define it وَالتَّنَاوُلْ فِي الْمَجْلِسِ. It is an exchange in the transaction, in the majlis, without verbal offer and acceptance. Then we talked about the fact that this is valid both in small things, in matters of little value, the khasis, and also the nafis. خلافا للكرخي. Contrary to Imam al-Karkhi, and we mentioned that this is this is a point of caution. Then, and here in the Majalla, if you look from items 170 onwards, there's a number of useful items in the Majalla related to the contract taking place. You can look at those between 170 and 180. Okay, Bismillah. Now, in a sales transaction, if you look end to end, you may look at something that's not for sale. Right? You saw something you liked. Right? So let's say Shaykh Yusuf saw my pen sitting here. Interesting pen. Right? Now, was it for sale? No. Okay. But there's a difference between this seeing it when it's not for sale and it, let's say, I have it up for sale here and the price is listed. Right? Because if he sees something, let's say I put it here, he came, picked it up to see it. But there's no suggestion that I want to sell it. There's a difference between that and if I put it up for sale and the sign that I put it up for sale is that the price is listed. Right? And there's implications to that, which we won't get into, right? There is mutlaq al-nadar and there's what's called unique. Is when you take something, unique. You need what's called sawm al-nadar and sawm al-shira. When you look at something, to consider it or to buy it. If it perishes, there's differences. We won't go into what, but there's, you just see something and you consider it, but then there is discussion, right? Discussion between the two parties. You negotiate. I spent half an hour negotiating with Sidi Zayn on buying his kufi. Right? And Sidi Hamza is sitting wondering what's going to happen with the kufi transaction. But in the end, he says, okay, I accept to sell it to you for this much. Am I bound by anything? And we've been negotiating. And this is a critical thing to be very clear about. People get confused. Negotiation isn't offers. And that's something to be very, very careful about. Even people, sometimes Shaykh types come up with questions, right? So just negotiation is not offer and acceptance. Okay? Negotiation is not offer and acceptance, right? Because right, that's called musawama. Right? Musawama. Because negotiation. You could just be shooting the breeze, right? You're walking down the market, and you're with someone who's like haggling and doing this. They say, "Let me haggle a little bit." It's not good to waste people's time, but they say, "Would you sell this to me for $50?" The person says, "Yes." I'm not interested. No way. That's not an offer. That is musawama. That's just negotiation. So that's very, very important. So anything that happens during negotiation, Islamically, is not binding at all. Okay? Practically, okay? So we go from negotiation. Very often, the negotiation can we can agree to terms, right? In the negotiation. So, said, how about if I paid $11? Said, that sounds reasonable. We could agree to terms. That agreeing to terms, is it a sale? No. That's a bit like engagement. Right? Zubayr says to Zubaydah, would you consider marrying me? He said, I wanted to marry you since we were in kindergarten. So if I asked your father for your hand in marriage, you'd accept? Finally, she walks away. That's nothing to do with nikah. That's just an expression of interest. But even when he goes, talks to Uncle Jamil, and they agree on a date and everything, what is that? That's negotiation, right? Even when they make a commitment, what is that? Like what we call engagement, you have a sales engagement, right? There's negotiation. Would you consider marrying me? Sure. They go and meet, they agree on the terms. Is that the marriage yet? Okay. Similarly, when you're buying something, it's a similar kind of contract. A lot of the problem happens when people do deal with each other, that they're not clear, are we negotiating or are we actually buying and selling? That causes a lot of problems with people. Okay. The assumption is that unless it's clear and unequivocal, it's just negotiation. Right? And it's just talk unless it's clear that this is an offer. Right? Right? So that's very, very, very important to be clear about. Right? Ijab and qabul, they have to be clear and decisive. Okay? So I'm interested in buying this, I would like to buy it. How about, would you accept this much for it? All of that is negotiation. So if it happens, right? Let's say if I'm broke, the sister is interested, says, mashallah, it's a great pen. Said, how about I sell it to you for $15? She says, sure. Is that a sale? No. Because how about does not initiate the sale. Now, very often transactions are actually ta'ati. How? I say, how about I sell this to you for $15? You're like, you thought it was really fancy. It's actually not that fancy. It's not more than $20. You say, sure. Here, this is an agreement to buy. When she takes it and gives me $15, that's the sale. The how about and sure is just negotiation, and then we just had a non-verbal transaction. So it's good to think through scenarios related to that. And of course, people are sloppy all the time about just even day-to-day, people are buying books together, etc., of not being clear about terms. There's merit in this. There's merit in this. I've seen traded with some, not transacted with some of the mission, a bunch of the ulama, and they, they take this bet. Yeah. I sell this to you for this much. They take it. So we have complete clarity, right? So, okay. So that's negotiation and offer and acceptance. It has to be decisive, right? Now, let's say we agreed on terms. That's at best a promise. At best a promise when it indicates. But let's say we agreed on terms. Then I said, okay, Sister Zubaydah, I sell you this pen for $15. She starts thinking, her stomach starts grumbling. She's like, $15 fountain pen. I don't know about this whole ink stuff. But then I opened it and, there's, I don't know. My hands will get ink on I'm not sure. What if I drop it on the kind of carpet? So I said it to you, could we agree in negotiation? I said, I sell it to you for $15. That's an ijab. Decisive. I sell it to you for this much. Is she bound to accept? Not at all. Yeah, not at all. And even if you'd agreed beforehand, if one party makes the offer, the other party does not have to accept. So he says, وَإِذَا أَوْجَبَ أَحَدُ الْمُتَعَاقِدَيْنِ الْبَيْعَ فَالْآخَرُ بِالْخِيَارِ إِنْ شَاءَ قَبِلَ فِي الْمَجْلِسِ وَإِنْ شَاءَ رَدَّهُ. If one of the two transacting parties initiates the offer of sale, أوجب, right? And the muta'aqidain are the two transacting parties. فَالْآخَرُ بِالْخِيَارِ. The other party has the choice, right? Has the option of acceptance. It's called khiyarul qabul. The option of acceptance. If he wishes, they can accept within the same majlis, the same session, and if they wish, they can reject it. So this is called khiyarul majlis. And this extends to now there's a couple of concepts. This is called khiyarul majlis, the option of acceptance within the majlis or non-acceptance. Right? A khiyar is an option. Keep that in mind, and we'll be coming to the different types of options that arise from a transaction. I say, I sell you this pen for $15. The other party has the option to agree or not within the majlis. Okay. Now, ideally, because we don't want dispute to arise, if I make the offer, you should either accept or reject immediately. Right? Because what do we want to have surety about? Taradi, mutual agreement. If I make the offer and you come back 2 days later, say, I accept. 2 days later, I'm offended. I no longer want to sell it. Price has gone up. I sold it. Then you get upset. Right? A whole bunch of things could happen. So, while the ideal would be that the offer and acceptance occur without delay, practically, we can't consider immediate acceptance of the offer is not feasible, because you may need time to think. But just keeping it open-ended, if I make the offer, 10 years later you come, you see me using the pen set, I accept. So what do you accept? Well, the offer you made me 10 years ago. Would that be reasonable? Because by then I don't have taradi. Okay. So, what do we consider? Right, there's the concept of the majlis. The majlis, which is the majlis, and this is that session, you could call it, right? That session, which is when we are engaged in our transaction. Right? It lasts during the majlis. Anything that indicates that we are no longer transacting ends that session. Such as, and he'll give us examples of what ends that session, right? Al-majlis. That's the idea of the majlis. And we consider the majlis because the asl would have been immediacy. اقتران الإيجاب بالقبول حقيقة. That would be the ideal. Keeping it open-ended is not feasible. Why would you need time? You need time to think. So if an offer is made, then as long as both parties are still together and nothing has happened that could indicate that they're no longer together or that they've turned away from each other, anything that would indicate the end of the session. One person got up, they walked away, they started doing something else. Means that you stopped thinking about it, or you possibly either stopped thinking about it or moved on to something else. Little things like drinking tea, coffee, whatever, would not, indicate moving away. So he says, وَأَيُّهُمَا قَامَ مِنَ الْمَجْلِسِ قَبْلَ الْقَبُولِ بَطَلَ الْإِجَابِ. If either of them stands up from the majlis before the acceptance takes place, this negates the previous offer. Right? This annuls the previous offer. Because standing up indicates moving on. And as the author of the Lubat says, وَكَذَلِكَ كُلُّ مَا يَدُلُّ عَلَى الْإِعْرَاضِ. Likewise, everything that indicates turning away from the negotiation. So al-amal al-yasir, slight action, would not entail that. You check your phone, right? Put it down. Does that mean that we're no longer talking? May not be ideal manners, but that does that affect things? No. But let's say I make an offer, I sell you this for $15, someone gets on the phone and has a كيف حالك؟ أهلا وسهلا الله يبارك فيك. Say I accept. You moved on to something else. Now, when you say I accept there, that is a new ijab. That is like a new ijab. Then I can accept or not. Right? If it's verbalized. If the person gives the money, that is initiating ta'ati. Non-verbal transaction. And I could say I accept, or I could reject it. Okay. Now here, so that's the first thing. This is the idea of khiyar al-majlis. Right? So this is quite packed. This one expression in Mukhtasar al-Quduri has a number of issues. If one initiates the offer, the first issue is what's called khiyar al-qabul. That if the offer is made, the other party has the right of accepting or rejecting. Number two is the concept of the majlis, right? That that the majlis that you have extended, and it could last for a long time. And we're just sitting staring at each other, or we don't have to be staring at each other. We're just sitting there. Neither did anything. Could last for a long time. We're just sitting there. And say I accept. It'd be better if something like that happened, just to refresh it, just to ask again. I would like to accept that. Just to make it clear. But as long as neither party physically separates by getting up or walking away, or moves on to another action. كل ما يدل على الإعراب. So the concept of the majlis, that's the second point. There's a third point that is there, which is in أوجب أحد المتعاقدين, if one of the two transacting parties makes an offer, فالآخر بالخيار, the other has a choice. إن شاء قبل, if they wish, they may accept. The offer must, the acceptance, the qabul must correspond to the offer. How? They say لا بد من موافقة القبول للإيجاب. The acceptance must correspond to the offer. How? One is, if I say I sell you this pen for $15. Sister Zubayda says to me, I accept to buy it for $12. Is that an acceptance? No, because you didn't accept my offer. The qabul is qabulul ijab. So the offer was, I sell this to you for 15. If you accept it by 12, that's a counter offer. Because what counts in the uqud is the ma'na, is the meaning. Right? So, in sha'a qabil, that's why, what does the author of the Lubab say? كل المبيع بكل الثمن. The whole item of sale for the whole price. So you cannot accept part of it for part of the price. So here, there's a difference of opinion between Imam Abu Hanifa and the Sahibain. And this issue is called تفرق الصفقة. So let's say I want to sell you Sister Zubayda really likes my mic, and she liked my presenter, and she liked my pen. So she says, I'll buy your pen and the mic and the presenter for $90. So we negotiated. That's how much is the mic? It's 50. How much is the presenter? It's 25. How much is the pen? It's 15. So we negotiate. So now she makes the offer. I'll buy these 3 things from you for $90. I say, I accept to sell you the mic and the presenter for 75. Can you do that? There's difference of opinion. And the issue is that when you sell things together, the price of selling things together may differ from when they're sold separately. The people bundle things together. Okay? So, according to Imam Abu Hanifa, right, that if one does that, you could only do that if you mention the price of so that there's difference of opinion, right? That in a situation like there's 3 items being sold. According to Imam Abu Hanifa, you couldn't accept part of the transaction even if the individual prices were mentioned, unless the other person explicitly accepts. So I offered you 3 things, and I mentioned the price of them. There's still the possibility that this is a special price in consideration of the 3 things being mentioned together. So even if I said, okay, I'll sell you these 3 things. The mic for 50, the presenter for 25, the pen for 15. So the total is $90. What if Zubaydah says to me, I accept to buy the mic and the presenter for 75, which is the price that I mentioned? Abu Hanifa said, that would not be sufficient unless, so he would consider that to be a counter offer from Zubaydah. I would have to explicitly agree, either verbally or by non-verbal proceeding with the transaction. Why? It might still be the case that لا أرضى بالتفريق. I may not accept their separation. I maybe gave a special price for the presenter because you're also going to buy my mic, which for the record, don't even dream of buying it for $50, right? So according to Abu Hanifa, you'd have to either have an explicit agreement there, or we'd have to agree to each one separately. I agree, I'll buy the mic for 50, I accept. I'll buy the presenter for 25, I accept. Right? That's according to Imam Abu Hanifa. According to the Sahibayn, they say إِلَّا إِذَا بَيَّنَ ثَمَنَ الْكُلِّ, unless in the transaction we mention the price of each item. And this is, so it's actually interestingly, the author of the Lubab here in the commentary mentions the opinion of the Sahibayn. And some of the Mutaakhirin gave fatwa on it. And it doesn't say it's their opinion. Right? It says, إِلَّا إِذَا بَيَّنَ ثَمَنَ كُلِّ وَاحِدٍ لأنه صفقات المعنى. This is the position of the Sahibayn. Right? That according to the Sahibayn, if I make the offer, right, I'll sell you mic for 50, presenter for 25, pen for 15, then if Zubaydah says, I accept to buy the mic and the presenter for $75, I've listed the prices already. According to Sahibayn, this would be valid. The difference revolves around whether this is considered like can we be sure that that the seller would be satisfied with that? So, can we be sure about taradi? Right? So there's a difference of opinion between Imam Abu Hanifa. Imam Abu Hanifa is, as we'll see in upcoming issues, extraordinarily careful about تحقيق وصف التراضي إلا أن تكون تجارة عن تراض منكم. Right? So we have to be sure, and as long as there's a reasonable possibility that either party may not accept this, it would not be a valid transaction according to Abu Hanifa. Now, in the Majalla, so what's mentioned here at the end of where it says, وَإِنْ شَاءَ رَدَّهُ, at the end here where it says, إِلَّا إِذَا بَيَّنَ ثَمَنَ كُلِّ وَاحِدٍ, etc. This is the position, he's quoting the position of the Sahibain. Many of the later scholars took it, but if you look in Majalla, item 179, you could put a meme, madda, item 179. So I put a footnote. هذا عندهما لا عندهم واختير قوله في المجلة. The position of Imam Abu Hanifa that you need explicit approval of breaking a composite offer into its parts, even if the price was listed. Now, practically, urf, custom is considered in this, right? Because in some industries, there may be variable pricing. Right? So imagine if you go to a pizza place, first pizza, some fancy pizza place, first pizza is $20, second pizza is $10. So see, I'm the smart, said I accept to buy the second pizza. Would that be a valid acceptance? Right? So that's why custom is given, because I agreed to sell the second pizza for 10. I mentioned the price, the first is 20, the second is 10. But the second was only 10 because you're buying two. But what if you say, I accept to buy the second pizza? And the third one's 5. So I'll buy the third one, not the first and second. Right? So that's why sometimes the difference of opinion between Imam Abu Hanifa and the Sahibain and what is the relied upon position also has to take into account, or that's why commercial transactions is not something simple to give fatwa on. Right? So look at item 179 there of the Majalla. And we took that this is called tafarruq al-safaqa. According to Imam Abu Hanifa, the offer has to correspond fully to the acceptance. So the acceptance has to correspond fully to the offer. Unless I made multiple offers, right? I said, I sell you the mic for $50. I sell you the presenter for $25. I sell, because this is as if I made multiple offers. Then you can accept 2 of them separately. Okay? I said the difference between I sell you A, I sell you B, I sell you C. Right? There's 3 offers there, as opposed to I sell you A plus B plus C. If I tell you I sell you A plus B plus C, you can't just say I accept B and C. Okay. Allah. So, and item 179 of the Majalla, and the issues related to the Majlis are there in items 181 to 185. They're kind of cool actually. Okay. What is a bay'a? Yeah. It's an exchange of mal bimal. Right? What is hukm al-bay'a? What's the ruling? The ruling here we mean al-hukm huwa al-athar al-mutarattibu ala al-shay'. It's what is the consequence of this. So if I sell you this pen, the pen starts off being owned by me. I say, Sheikh Yusuf, I sell you this pen for $20. He accepts. Now, who owns this pen? Right? I own the pen. The sales take place is mubadala. It's an exchange of an item of value, pen, for an item of value, $20. When with agreement, right? With complete agreement, taradi. When this happens, he owns the pen, I own $20 that he has. That's it. Okay. So, right? Because I don't have to give it to him till he gives me the money. Right? But there's a so he tells us about this. وإذا حصل الإيجاب والقبول لزم البيع. Right? If the offer and acceptance take place, the sale becomes binding. Right? ولا خيار لواحد منهما. And neither party has the option to cancel that transaction. Right? إلا من عيب, unless there's a defect and there's a type of option of cancel, which is called khiyarul aib, the option that arises when there's a aib. Right? The option arising from a defect. أو عدم رؤية, or because you didn't see what was being sold. And that's called khiyarul ru'ya, the option of cancellation upon seeing an item you had not previously seen. Or if you specified the option of cancellation. Right? Oh, shartin. Right? You could specify the option of cancellation. And these are called the khiyarat, the various types of options of cancellation. Now, there's a problem here. O Hanafis, you are going against the words of the Prophet ﷺ. There's a hadith related by Bukhari and Muslim from Ibn Umar, from Sayyidina Abdullah ibn Umar radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. The Prophet ﷺ said, Al-mutabayi'ani bil-khiyar. The mutabayi'an, the two transacting parties, the buyer and the seller, bil-khiyar, have the option of cancelling. مَا لَمْ يَتَفَرَّقَا, as long as they don't part. So Imam al-Shafi'i took that literally. That if I sell Shaykh Yusuf the pen, he accepts. Or okay, let's put it the other way around. Shaykh Yusuf sells me the pen. So I get the pen. Before we part, I look at the pen. I don't want it. So I bought it already. I said, I don't want it. As long as we've not separated physically, I can cancel. This is called khiyarul majlis. Khiyarul majlis. The option of cancelling within the majlis. Imam al-Shafi'i affirmed it. Because the hadith says it. Al-mutabayi'ani bil-khiyar. The two transacting parties have the option of cancellation. They call this khiyarul majlis. ما لم يتفرقا. The hadith does not mean what you think it means. Why? Because how would this work? Right? Firstly, this hadith is dhanni. It's ظني الثبوت. It's related by Bukhari and Muslim على العين والرأس. But it's ظني الثبوت. It's not a decisive text in how it's come to us, and it's not decisive in its meaning. How is it not decisive in its meaning, ya Jama'ah? We'll explain that in a second. But what's the problem is that if I could, once I buy this pen from Shaykh Yusuf, the pen belongs to me. If Shaykh Yusuf can cancel this transaction, once it's done, he can له أن يتصرف في الملك من غير رضايا. It would mean that he can do something with my property without my رضا, without my إلا أن تكون تجارة عن تراض منكم, except that it be through trade on the basis of mutual agreement. I did not agree for him to cancel the transaction for something that now belongs to me. Because once the transactions happen, this belongs to me. If he can take my property without my rida, this is أكل أموال الناس بالباطل. This is, you've taken my property without my approval. But then, what do you do with the hadith? Imam Alam al-Maydani explains the hadith without mentioning the hadith itself. لأن في الفسخ إبطال حق الغير الآخر, because in being able to annul the transaction after it takes place without having agreed to any kind of annulment, إبطال حق الغير, it negates the right of the other because it's my property. فلا يجوز, it's not permitted. It will be taking my لا تأكلوا أموالكم بينكم بالباطل. Any type of taking of a property of another without their agreement is batil, according to the verse. So how do we deal with the hadith? الحديث محمول على خيار القبول. The hadith, which is the hadith we did. When somebody mentions something like this, well, hadith, the hadith, which hadith? A sign that you're preparing properly, you should have had a question here, at the very least. What hadith is being referred to here? Better than that, you look for it. It's المتبايعان بالخيار ما لم يتفرقا, related by Bukhari and Muslim from Abdullah ibn Umar. محمول على خيار القبول. This, the hadith, the two transacting parties have the option of cancellation. ما لم يتفرقا, as long as they don't part. The mutabayi'an, the two transacting parties, they're only transacting parties during the offer and acceptance. Because before the offer and acceptance, they're negotiating parties. And after the acceptance takes place, are they still transacting parties? No, because the transaction is taking place. Al-mutabayyi', right, is the one who is engaged in the act of buying. Right? So if I bought this case, am I a buyer now? No, I'm an owner. We are only mutabayyi'an during the transaction. And what is the transaction? Ijab wa qabul. They're only called mutabayyi', the transacting parties, after the sale, metaphorically. باعتبار المآل, based on what took place. Right? So that's number one. ما لم يتفرقا, as long as they don't part. As long as they don't part, التفرق here could be a تفرق بالأقوال. They don't part in their opinions. That they have a choice as long as they don't differ. Because the differing itself ends the offer. That I sell this to you for $50, say, I accept as long as you sell me the pen. We've parted because we're not coming to agreement on what's the item of sale. So the tafarruq is bil aqwal, right? And he explains all of that. So in the Hanafi school, we understand the hadith to refer to khiyarul qabul. That when the offer is made, both parties have the right of acceptance. It's called khiyarul qabul, the option of accepting, or to rescind the offer, or to reject the offer. Okay? ما لم يتفرقا. As long as they both have the right to back off, as long as they don't differ or part. So it's understood to be khiyarul qabul. The Hanafis did not affirm khiyarul majlis. That if I sell you something, before we part ways, you can say, nah, I don't want it anymore. That thing that takes place after, that's called iqala, cancellation. Cancellation requires a separate offer and acceptance, and has to be based on taradi. And we'll be seeing Babul Iqala coming up, the chapter on cancellation. There's great merit in cancellation. The Prophet said, "Man aqala nadiman athratahu, aqala Allahu atharatihi yawm al-qiyamah." Right? The one who cancels the erroneous transaction of another, Allah cancels their slips on the day of resurrection. There's a number of hadiths about that. And it's recommended, as long as there's no harm for you. And we'll be looking at the section on offers when we come to it. Right? And once the sales transaction takes place, neither party has. So we affirm khiyarul qabul. We do not affirm khiyar al-majlis, contrary to the Sada Shafi'iyya. Okay? And for those interested, you can look at here the discussion on this hadith, and if someone could gather the text of it, from Fath al-Qadir Ibn al-Humam. Right? You can find it digitally. You can find the hadith and Ibn al-Humam's discussion on it from Fath al-Qadir. It wouldn't hurt for the more advanced students. Illa min aib, unless there's a aib, right? Because if there's a aib, like, unless there was a defect in what you bought, and we'll be seeing that. The commentator asks, oh shart, unless you specified the option of cancellation. And we'll be looking at khiyar al-shart when we come to it. Oh adami ru'ya, or you just didn't see it. Now why would you buy something you hadn't seen? Notice when people buy books, this is a big problem. Right? So we should, one of the exercises for those here is, how do you safely buy books? You need to dispute. You guys are all nice guys, but let's say, Hamza buys $1,000 worth of books that 3 people wanted to buy. Who bought the books and who owns them? There's several possibilities. Is it 3 of you buying the books together? Or are you buying the books and then selling them to them? So are you an agent on behalf of them? Are you 3 transacting party? There could be at least 4 obvious ways that transactions could take place. It would be the 3 of you are buying it from one person, but then you have to make clear there's 3 of you buying it. Or are you an agent on behalf of the 3? Or are you buying the books and then selling them to them? Then what are the terms? Okay? And these kinds of things always lead to dispute. That's an exercise from now to the end of the chapter. How to safely buy and sell things together. But people do it in their day-to-day and it causes bad blood. And that's why agency is important. Okay, Bismillah. Now, there are conditions related to the item of sale, and there's conditions related to the price. Okay? In general, in order for there to be taradi, agreement, you have to know what you are getting from the sale and what you are given in the sale. Right? That's obvious. Now, if you can see what's being sold, I sell you this for $20. Now, do you know exactly what kind of pen this is? No. But it's something in front of you, right? So if it's something that I'm pointing to, then I don't have to give details regarding it. The onus would be on you to have. If you wanted more information, you should have asked. This is mushar ilayhi. I'm pointing to it. Unless, of course, if 10 people see this, right? But imagine if I sold it to you like this. I took the pen out. I sold it to you like this. If you got, oh my God, it's empty. Was that a fair trade? No. That would be considered a aib. Because if you ask 10 people, what is this? What would you say? It's a pen. Is it? No, because the actual pen was missing. Right? So, but that problem is covered by what? Khiyarul aib, the option of cancelling if there is a aib. Because no, like if this is $20 but without the actual nib, it's not worth anything. Or worth very little. Unless I said, I'll sell you this empty pen shell or whatever. So, and same with the price. Let's say you're on a boat cruise. Okay? And those who are interested in boat cruises, David Foster Wallace wrote an awesome article called Something Supposedly Fun That I Will Never Do Again. It's a brilliant piece of English writing. And of just grumpiness and worldliness. Right? Anyways, you're on a boat cruise. Let's say Sheikh Yusuf's Canadian. Right? And and what do you use in Singapore? What's the currency? Dollars. Right? Is the exchange rate similar?
Similar to Canada.
Let's just say it's not. Right?
1.3 to US dollar.
Okay. Let's just say it's okay. Let's say Sheikh Yusuf's American. Okay, Sheikh Yusuf's American. He's with a Singaporean friend on a boat cruise in the Caribbean, where there's a different local currency, also dollars. And Sheikh Yusuf says, in international waters, near the island of Carmine, that has Carmenian dollars, he's American, and his friend is Singaporean. I sell you this for 10. What 10 is it? So you have to specify the item of sale, and you have to specify the price in a way that would not lead to dispute. Right? So that they can be tahqiq al-taradi. So he says, وَالْأَعْوَاضُ الْمُشَارُ إِلَيْهَا لَا يُحْتَاجُ إِلَى مَعْرِفَةِ مِقْدَارِهَا فِي جَوَازِ الْبَيْعِ. the items of exchange that are being pointed to, one does not need to know their amount for the permissibility of the transaction. Now, a'wad is plural of iwad. Iwad, and the iwad is the item of one item of exchange. Plural iwad is the item of exchange, whether it's the mabiya, the item, the item of sale, or it's the thaman, the price. Al-mushar ilayha, right? Right? And they say, right? لأن الإشارة من أقوى أسباب التعريف, because pointing to something is the strongest of ways of making something known. Right? So if you're pointing to it, right? I'll sell you this. You can see it for $100. You accept. Then you can see the item. Now, then the onus is on you. If you wanted to know more about what it is, you should have found out. Unless I tricked you, or there's aib in it. Right? So I sell you a laptop, looks like a Zax Pro, but turns out it's just a toy. That's a aib. Right? So, في جواز البيع, for the sale to be valid. والأثمان المطلقة, the ثمن, أثمان is plural of ثمن, right? Literally the price, right? المطلقة, if the price is mentioned without specification, unconditioned, right? So we've not specified what currency, right? لا يصح, right, is not permitted. So I tell you this for 10, and it's not known what 10 do I mean, إلا أن تكون معروفة القدر والصفة, unless it's known in extent or quality, right? Because if I say it in Canada, right? So here there's an important principle, which is al-ma'ruf urfan kal-mashruط shartan, right? Kal-mashruط shartan, right? Something that is customarily known, it's as if contractually specified. So if I said here, so imagine if I sold this pen to this poor pen, right? I sold this pen to Zubaydah. I sell you this for 10. She gives me 10 cents. So I accept. Here's the payment. Would you buy that? Would you buy that? Would you accept? No, because anybody you ask, would the pen be sold for 10 cents? No. Okay? That's no. Now this used to be a little trickier in the old days, because sometimes in the same marketplace you'd have various currencies, right? Classically you would have 3 predominant types of money. The dinar, which is the gold coins. The dirham, which are the silver coins. And it's easy to remember which. The dinar is worth more. The bigger word is for the more valuable thing. Dinar, gold. Dirham, silver. Then you also have fulus, which are base currency, to generally use for small change. And they say the fulus are called fulus because you could have a pocket full of fulus, but you're still muflis, but you're still bankrupt. You don't have anything. You can't. It's just loose change. So I have pockets full of money. What do you have? I have fulus. Like I have 1 cent coins. Would you pay any bills with 1 cent coins typically? can't pay rent, can't do the week's grocery, right? So those. But classically, and this is why a lot of discussion comes about this, is what if, and very often marketplaces would be gathering places for people from different lands, right? That's why and sometimes in the same market, there'd be different currencies operating. So this needs to be specified. And this also comes up online. If you start a store, you list what price it is, make clear what currency you're talking about. People generally do that, but sometimes not. Especially Americans, because they assume that we run the world, but times are changing. Okay. So this is one issue. Then another issue related to sales, he says, وَيَجُوزُ الْبَيْعُ بِثَمَنٍ حَالٍ وَهُوَ الْأَصْلُ. It is permitted to make a sale with a payment, with a price that is hal, that is immediately due. And that's the basis. Okay? Okay? وَمُؤَجَّلٍ. And also, it is also permitted to make a sale with a deferred payment. إذا كان الأجل معلوما. If the period of deferral is known, right? And whether that deferral is to one date or multiple dates, which in modern use they call بيع التقسيط بالقسط, right? Or like installment payments, right? So the basis of a sale is that the payment is made now, but it could also be specified to be deferred. But if we defer, we have to agree on a deferral date. Because if you defer to an unspecified date, لأن جهالة الأجل تفضي إلى النزاع, because not knowing the period of deferral leads to dispute, and وكل فيكون منافيا للتراضي, so it would negate mutual agreement. وكل ما كان كذلك فهو ممنوع, and anything like that is not allowed in a transaction. So the deferral has to be known. Now there's three things to mention here. First is that يجوز البيع بثمن الحال, right, with an immediately due payment. This is the assumption. However, we mentioned a governing principle, which is المعروف عرفا كالمشهود شرطا. Unless there is clearly established market custom to the contrary, right? Whether general custom of the market is called a urf am or a urf khas, or in a particular type of transaction, if there's a clear urf, it's a clear custom, meaning clear market practice. So, for example, some wholesale vendors won't bill you right away. Why? Because people change their orders. Let's say, Zubaydah, Universal Enterprises, ZOO, terrible acronym, ZUE, right? She wants to buy computers for 5,000 employees. Okay? So she makes an online purchase. Very often, they would bill in a few days. One, because they want to make sure they have the whole inventory, but also because sometimes the order might change over a couple of days. So it's known that the payment's due in a week's time. Okay? And in many things, because where many services work like that, because people change their mind. You buy a photo online, for example, Right? The sale's made, but they'll bill you in a week. Why? Because you decide, no, we don't want that one, we want another one. So if it's known, that's number one. Right? Unless the custom is to the contrary. Because al-ma'ruf urfan kal-mashhud shartan. But of course, you can't impose the custom on another. Right? If we disagree, what happens? We either agree, yeah, that's the custom. Otherwise, we would go to court. Right? The ta'jeel has to be ma'loom. The deferral has to be known. There's a problem here that the later scholars found, which is a lot of people, ignorance spread about financial transaction. Right? So a lot of people would say, okay, I'll send you this for $100 and you can pay me later. If the buyer says you can pay me later and you agree, when would I want the payment later? As the seller. Later, as soon as possible. I'll say, I meant by tonight. As the buyer, what you understand is later? As late as possible. So that would lead to dispute. And anything that could lead to dispute corrupts the transaction. كل ما يفضي إلى النزاع فهو مفسد للعقل. It corrupts the transaction, makes it voidable, right? And it's sinful. It's sinful. It's a serious matter. So this would happen all the time. So the متأخرين رضي الله تعالى عنهم, right, said that the fatwa is that in ذكر الأجل, in ذكر التأجيل ولم يذكر أجل معلوم فيقدر بالشهر. يعني تيسيرا ودفعا لضرر النزاع. Right? That if a deferral is mentioned and no time of deferral is mentioned, the mutaakhirin, the later scholars, gave fatwa that the default would be, we would consider a month. Unless there is a clear urf in the type of transactions that we do, that there's a market standard, they say consider it to a month. Because usually, why can't someone pay right now? Because they're waiting for their next paycheck. Right? People tend to get paid month to month. So that would be, because and they gave their legal basis, and you can find this in the you can find it in the commentaries of the Majallat. Okay. وَمَنْ أَطْلَقَ الثَّمَنِ فِي الْبَيْعِ. Whoever mentions the price in a transaction without specifying what type it is. Right? أطلق أي عن قيد البلد والوصف. Right? So someone who mentions a price, I sell you this for 10, but they don't mention what currency and what quality of currency, because sometimes they have different qualities of gold coins or silver coins. كان على غالب نقد البلد. It would be understood to be the predominant naqd. The naqd is the predominant money used in that country. لأنه المتعارف, because that is the customary, that's the custom of that land. فإن كانت النقود مختلفة, but if there are multiple currencies being used in that land, فالبيع فاسد, then the transaction would be corrupt. A legal term for that is voidable. Right? And because of the undefinition, what do we mean by 10 here? Okay. إلا أن يبين أحدهما ويقبل الآخر. Unless one of them made it clear, right? But then the other person would have to accept in the middle. So this is and the example would be if we're on a boat cruise and two people from two different countries say, I sell you this for 10, and we don't know which 10 is being referred to. Is it 10 of the local currency, or of your currency, or my currency? Okay? And the boat cruise doesn't have a predominant currency. Okay? But if, let's say Sheikh Yusuf's American, I'm Pakistani, and we're in I'm Canadian, let's say. I'm Canadian. And I sell him this or he sells me this for 50. I accept. He says, I meant $50 US. Would that be accepted? Because غالب نقد البلد, the predominant currency in Canada is Canadian dollars. Long may it stay that way. Okay? That would not be accepted. Okay? But of course, the superior thing is to be clear. Anytime there's unclarity, we are in a foreign land, or we are of different countries, then we should make clear what's the currency being used. And that is the mustahab. Okay. Any questions here?
Just from one point before. So we mentioned the muta'akhirin's position and the position that they gave fatwa. Is this something that we can follow?
Of course, that's what I mentioned.
Okay. Is there?
But practically, one should mention that we be clear on those things.
So is there a reason why it's not in the Bab?
It's not a book of fatwa. This is just the purpose of the Lubab, just to clarify the text. Okay.
Back to what we were mentioning about the ijab and qubud. If there's an employee for a store and something happens in the transaction and they say, just take it, does that necessitate that I have to find out if they have permission to do that, or are they, the onus on them?
Okay. A store employee can be what is the legal status of a store employee? Right? So we're going to stop here because the next part needs a little bit of unpacking. But just to give you a heads up, we will definitely get to Khiyar al-Shart for next class. Right? So be prepared for those pages, and you can do Khiyar al-Shart as well. Right? Be prepared, for this upcoming section and Khiyar al-Shart. Now, a good question. If you're buying something and the store, and it's good to think about these questions, right? Think about these practical questions, because it illustrates principles. If you're buying something, and let's say the store employee presses enter, and something happens, their terminal blows up. They say, just take it. Can you or can you not? So to understand this, what is the legal status of a store employee? Right? A store employee acts as an agent on behalf of the company. Right? So they're assumed to be a rightful representative of the company within the limits of their assumed agency. So someone working at the counter is it reasonable to assume that this person has permission to be working on the counter? Yeah. Usually, right? One of my friends, what he did, his Shaykh was going to miss a flight. So he told the Shaykh, I'll be back in a second. So he went and stood at an empty counter and said, folks, come here. So most of the line, because there's an empty line, most of the line moved to that empty thing. And once they moved, he said, just hold on a second, I'll bring an agent to take care of you guys. So he wasn't working for the flight, but he just worried that if his teacher waited with all these people in line, they'd miss the flight. So he pulled off a trick. There's an empty counter, so he went there, okay folks, you can line up here as well. And then he went to the airplane company and said, I don't know what's going on. There's all these people standing in line, but there's no one attending. Oh no! So they sent someone there, but by the time the Shaykh went through. But normally you can assume that someone standing at the counter, they have the permission to transact, right? So anything that, but the permission, so they're what's called a wakil. They're acting with agency on behalf of the company. So anything that's within the normal bounds of agency, you can assume that they have permission to do that. Let's say you went to the grocery store and you're short $2. Say, don't worry about it. And you assume that that's reasonable, that so big organic Ontario, it's called BOO, right? Big organic Ontario, right? The big corporations selling organics, they said, okay, you don't have to pay $2. Yeah. Would you be surprised? No. That's within what's reasonable. But let's say you went to buy a $5,000 laptop, high-end laptop. You went to pay. The person says the system's down, sir. Just take it. Here's an invoice. Would you think that someone would just give you a laptop for free like that? Just a regular employee? No. Unless they're the manager or something like that. Say, I'm the store manager. Something credible like that, right? So anything that's within the reasonable, you can assume that the person has the permission to do that. Okay? Unless there are signs to the contrary, and someone seems irresponsible, right? Because we have, and that goes back to nasiha. A religion is sincere concern. Does this person have permission to do this? Right? So unless there's signs that they're being irresponsible themselves, then we have a moral duty, right? Towards that company as well. If this person is acting wrongfully, just as you saw an employee stealing something, you'd be morally bound to tell them not to inform. Why? Because it's the right of another. So in general, you can assume permission. But unless it's outside the bounds of reason. It's also important that if someone's an employee, in any kind of capacity, one is an agent on behalf of the company or one's employer within the limits of the agency related to one's role. Why is that important? And a lot of people, this is why the ulama say the purpose of studying financial transactions is not to read some history, but this has to do with our day-to-day. Okay? And just dealing with a situation that advice of people. Someone was working for a company as a full-time employee, and he started doing the same work for another company, exactly in the same line of work, and then started his own company offering the same services. Can't do that without permission, right? Because this is khilaful amana, right? Because the person is acting as an agent on behalf of the company. Within what they're doing, it is assumed and understood morally that you are acting in a way that fulfills the trust such that you are taking into account at least the sound interests of the company. That is adl, that is justice. It is ihsan, that you act in the best interest of the company. That is recommended, without hurting or harming yourself or others. Right? It doesn't mean you have to like work extra hours or this that. But ihsan is recommended, but adl is wajib. Otherwise, one falls under Allah's warning in Surah Al-Mutaffifin. Waylun lil-mutaffifin. Woe and wail, and it sounds like wailing. It's from the same thing. It's that which causes you to cry in loss and regret. And they say it's one of the pits of hell, because people wail in there. It's interesting. Waylun lil-mutaffifin, of those who don't give due measure. And they demand their full rights, but they don't give others their full rights. It also has to do within work. So these are very serious matters. Right? So we'll stop there because it's not enough time. Okay, we'll take one question.
Okay, does a change in conversation or within the same sitting indicate?
So, good question. So does a change in conversation and the majlis? Small talk doesn't, but completely switching the subject would. Okay? There's a big difference between someone says, "Oh, Mashallah, that cap looks good," but we're not having a conversation. But then we move on. So, is that made of wool or this? And they say, "Can I see it?" And we moved on from the thing would be, are they still? Are they still in the offer and acceptance phase? So I say, I'd sell you this for $10. Would like some more tea? Yeah, sure. It's not okay. Okay? But if suddenly, you smell the tea and say, could you describe what's the origin of this oolong? I say it's Fujian Baroque. What does that mean? And we start discussing Fujian Baroque, oolong tea or whatever. Then we moved on from buying and selling to discussing types of oolong. I prefer Formosa. Then we moved on. But at the end of it, if an exchange takes place, then that would be ta'ati. That would be non-verbal exchange. Okay, we'll stop there. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم والحمد لله رب العالمين. So I'm going a little bit on the slow side initially, because there's a lot of foundational concepts that are important to be very, very clear about.